Good afternoon and welcome to all of our listeners. Today on ARC's Fireside Chat, we'll be talking about voting yes on Proposition 17, restoring voting rights for community members coming home. This is a historic and very important vote, and we have some amazing people, as we always do, to talk about this that have been directly impacted and have directly experienced the lack of being able to vote when they returned home. Before we get into our discussion today, would like to first give you some instructions, as I always do. If you look at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer, there's a ribbon at the very bottom. It says chat and Q&A. If you'd like to communicate directly with anyone that's on the panel, please put your comments or questions in either the chat or the Q&A, and we will, as time permits, directly address those questions. Again, I want to welcome you all to the ARC's Fireside Chat. And I'd like to now introduce two truly amazing human beings, Esteban and Saleem. I'd like to give Esteban, could you introduce yourself and Prop 17? Take a minute or two to introduce yourself in Proposition 17, please.
Well, yeah, my name is Esteban Nunez. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
And Saleem, my brother, how you doing? Could you please introduce yourself and share your affiliation with ARC and your work?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Saleem Allen, and I am an Anti-Recidivism Coalition member. I've been a member for approximately 29 months. That's how long I've been out. As soon as I got out, I joined the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Did 22 years in prison for a second-degree murder that I committed on my 19th birthday, and I was paroled through the California Board of Prison Terms, and here I am. I'm currently working in the entertainment industry as a driver, just continuing to give back to ARC and my community in any capacity that I can, and I'm definitely happy to be here today.
Hey, thank you and welcome. Thank you for taking the time out. Could you, real quick, Saleem, could you explain to us, what is a driver? Like a driver?
So I actually, through a collaboration between the Anti-Recidivism Coalition and a nonprofit organization called Manifest Works, I went through a 12-week training program through Manifest Works to become a production assistant in it.
I've really worked hard to, I wanted to work, I hate to, toot my own horn, but I am one of the hardest working men in Hollywood. And on the crew side, not talent side, crew side. And having the opportunity to be working Hollywood through Manifest Works and ARC, it's been a blessing. Drivers, so what I do is I've positioned myself to, I went and got my Class A license. I'm actually driving, they're called like talent motor homes. And it's what the talent, where they kind of reside at their green room on sets, like on location. So it's definitely an honor to be doing what I'm doing. And I'm blessed.
Thank you again, Saleem, for joining us. And let's dive right in. So, Esteban, could you tell us, what is the significance of Prop 17? How will it affect the California Constitution?
I want Saleem to kind of cover just the significance of it, just because I think it's important for somebody who is currently disenfranchised and is marginalized to be able to just speak to the significance and sense of urgency around this. So, Saleem, do you want to?
Yes. Prop 17 is a very monumental proposition, and I'm glad that it got to the point where it's at, to where it's going to the voters to decide if they would like to restore the right to vote to people who are currently on parole. This proposition, it really means a lot to me, because I feel as if I'm only 3/5 of a citizen not being able to vote right now, currently being on parole. I'm working to get off of parole. The right to vote, it's just so fundamental to our democracy. The voters having that chance to restore that right to me, it means a lot on very many levels. Just for me to just be able to be that much closer to being free and having a say in my community and my government, local, state, and federal.
Yeah, and to Saleem's point, essentially what Prop 17 does is amends the California Constitution to restore the voting rights to approximately 50,000 people who have completed their prison sentences.
So it will amend our Constitution and what if somebody wanted to change that back, to take those voting rights back away from people who have finished their prison sentences? What steps would they have to take?
They would have to re-amend the Constitution. So they would have to go it would have to be another proposition.
Thank you both, Saleem and Esteban. Saleem, how long have you been disenfranchised, and have you ever voted before? And what will that feel like when you're able to go vote? Have you imagined that?
I have currently been disenfranchised for 24 years. I went to prison in 1996, and it is now 2020. So people, and since I have been voted, as I stated, I have never voted before in my life, but you know, when I was in prison, I developed a consciousness and a desire to actually participate in my participate in my government. I just understand how important it is for citizens to vote, to have a say, and have a direct influence and impact on the way that our government is governed.
Thank you, Saleem. So Esteban, in terms of how does California compare to other states when it comes to felony disenfranchisement?
You know, it's crazy because we've always seen, at least I've always seen California as a progressive state that really passes landmark legislation and sets the tone for national momentum. That's not currently the case as it relates to voting rights to people who have completed their prison sentences. California currently lags behind 19 other states and Washington, D.C. There are 2 states, Maine and Vermont, that never take away a person's right to vote. You know, and it's interesting because, you know, California, it was first ratified in the Constitution, California's Constitution, to completely disqualify people with convictions the opportunity to vote. And now we're seeing so much momentum nationally around this. I mean, in the past, 2 years, we've seen Florida restore voting rights to people on parole. New Jersey, Nevada, New York has also done it. Louisiana. I mean, we're seeing a bunch of states really understand the humanity and the importance of moving towards a more inclusive society.
Thank you, Esteban. So here's something that troubled me, Saleem, and I want you to weigh in on this. There are people in our community, and I know where I grew up in South LA, that believe voting doesn't matter. What would you say to convince people that their vote does matter?
Number one, I would say that that's a fallacy. It's definitely, it's a misconception. And I would urge people to at least just give it a shot. Who knows? It may work, challenge that belief. Me personally, I do not hold that belief. It definitely hurts me that a large segment of minority communities hold that belief. But I would say it's better to at least go out and try, give it a try, because your vote, I believe that every vote matters, and I believe that every citizen, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, everybody should exercise their right to vote, and give it a try, because your vote may just it may count and influence an election or a particular law that you may want passed. It may turn out the way that you want it. So I would say, give it a shot. It's kind of like the lottery. You have to be in it to win it.
Thank you, Saleem. And I'd like to point something out to our audience and to listeners, and do your own research on this so you'll be really aware of it. Immediately after the end of slavery, during a period that they call the Reconstruction period, so to speak, at the end of the Civil War, most people don't realize this, but for a moment, a great number of African Americans were elected into office in places like Mississippi and Alabama. And then paramilitary groups like the Ku Klux Klan were used to literally run elected officials out of office that were African American. Literally, they either lynched them, set them on fire, threatened them with violence, and they literally ran them out of office immediately after the Reconstruction and end of slavery. Now we think about this for a minute. That was the first time we would see what you would call voter suppression. Because not only did they run them out of office, then they began to put laws together where you had to spell or sign your name, or you had to have all these different requirements met in order for you to be able to vote. These were the first steps to be able to suppress the vote of African-American people that were newly freed from enslavement in this country. And that's just a fact. That's history. I'm not making it up. You can Google it, go Wikipedia, pull out an old college textbook. This is part of our history. And even right now, today, there are efforts to suppress the vote of minority voters. Esteban, could you weigh in on that a little bit?
You know, yeah, I mean, I want to start just by saying we're seeing it currently in Florida, right? Where Florida passed a subsequent law that required any kind of monetary debt to be paid prior to your ability to vote being restored. Bloomberg recently paid $16 million to help restore the rights to vote to thousands of people who had felony convictions in Florida. But the Attorney General in Florida is challenging that and investigating it and looking into it. And I think, you know, first you had Florida who passed Amendment 4, restore the voting rights to 1.4 million people. Then you see a subsequent law that requires them to essentially have a poll tax to be able to vote. And now you have a gentleman, Mayor Bloomberg, who put $16 million into restoring the rights to vote to people who had this quote unquote poll tax for them. And it's being challenged. You know, it's like you just can't shape the marginalization that occurs. You know, I don't need to speak about systemic racism because I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I do want to say in California, 3 out of 4 men leaving California prisons are African American, Latinx, or Asian Americans. So as you can imagine, those are 3 out of 4 people that are being disenfranchised the second they've completed their prison sentences.
To people that are listening, if you live in a community where you hear people saying that their vote doesn't count, why they shouldn't vote, and give you all of these reasons, stop and think just for a minute. If your vote did not count, why would they be trying to stop you? Why would they be trying to suppress the vote of the votes that are coming out of minority communities? Ask yourself, it's a really, really basic question. If your vote didn't matter, be like, oh, so what, let them vote. It's not gonna make a difference anyway. But because your vote does count, because it does matter, there are efforts to make sure that you can't vote. If you think of it just as Esteban just named, the number of people that are coming out of institutions that can't vote, that's literally taken away from our voter pool. And that impacts so many different things in our life, not just on the presidential level, but if you think about it on a local level. Your vote determines who's gonna be on your school board in the school that your kids or grandkids go to. Your vote is gonna determine who your mayor is gonna be, who your city council is gonna be, and they determine who the police chief is gonna be. Your vote determines who the sheriff is, who the district attorney is. Those are all local level voting issues. And that's every day, every single day of your life stuff that you experience. What your pavement looks like on the streets that you drive down. Some of the most basic things that we experience every day are impacted by how we vote. So it's not just the presidential vote that we need to look at. We need to look at the local vote, meaning the city of Los Angeles, or any one of the cities, Inglewood, Lancaster, Compton, Watts, all of those are cities that have elections. And then the county of Los Angeles or Sacramento or whatever city you're in or county that you're in. Your vote is going to determine what your community look like. Your vote is going to determine how your community is policed. Your vote is going to determine what your schools look like and how your children are taught. Do we want to have schools that have barbed wires and armed police officers in it that literally attack our kids and handcuff them? Is that the type of community that we want to live in? Do we want to have elected officials that do not actually represent us and what we want in our communities? If that's how we feel about it, then we don't vote. But if we want to be able to have a say in what our everyday lives look like in our communities, we have to vote. And we have to be informed about voting. So we need to read about like who am I voting for and why? And do their beliefs actually line up with mine? Want to jump into something a little bit different in terms of, I just talked about the local level, Esteban, and how important that is in everyday life. But there's another level when we look at the presidential election and how that can impact everyday life. And we're seeing it on the news right now today with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Explain, how is that going to impact our everyday life if this person that's in the White House right now today has an opportunity to actually select another Supreme Court justice?
Yeah, I mean, you would have 6 conservative judges and 3 that are not conservative judges. I mean, this is how laws are going to be interpreted beyond our lifetime and beyond our kids' lifetimes. I mean, this is something that not only directs us as individuals, but it directs our legacies as human beings. The other thing I'll say is there was Tom Bradley who ran for governor in the 1980s. He lost by 1 percentage point, I want to say, per precinct. He would have been the first African-American governor in California. And to be honest, California still hasn't seen an African-American governor. And if you see 3 out of 4 people leaving prisons are minorities, you can imagine, had those voting rights been restored, where we would be today, and who would have been running California as a governor back then.
So I have a question that's off topic, but it's on topic in terms of voting. We're specifically talking about Proposition 17, voting rights for people that have completed their prison sentences. Off topic, which is on the ballot, a question in our chat box is, Human Rights Watch and other orgs in criminal justice reform space have come out against Proposition 25 because it gives judges so much power and reinforces racist risk assessment algorithms. Can you let us know what you think about these points? So I'm gonna touch on it real quick, and then I'll hand it off to you, Esteban. So in terms of from my perspective, from what I read and from what I see, first, think of it in these terms. If it gives more power to judges, then how is it that over 150,000 people will be released without seeing a judge when they're arrested for certain offenses? So you'll be released in 12 hours with a court date and you don't see a judge. That sounds to me like you're taking power from judges. Right now, every person that gets arrested has to wait to see a judge for arraignment and to determine if they're going to be released or bailed or have bail. One of the things that Prop 25 does is it will allow people, about 150,000 people, to be released without even seeing a judge annually. That would decrease the number of people that are currently in our county jail systems. So that doesn't, first of all, that doesn't sound like it's giving judges more power. It actually sounds like, to me, it's taking away that power. The second part, in terms of the racist risk assessment algorithms, as the question is asked from one of our viewers, there are multiple safeguards that have been put in place, including Proposition 36 that was ran in 2019, where an evaluation will be taken to determine if there are racial biases. And the information on this will be sent to the state legislature, and it will be public information for all of us to see. With that information, we'll be able to change that algorithm, as you call it, if necessary. And we'll continue to adjust it. Not only that, but we also have a number of electeds that are 100% behind making sure that we get it right, we push this forward, and we change that algorithm. So right now, as I see it, from my point of view, and from what I've read and everything that I've seen and looked at, this is the what ifs. What if this happens? What if this happens? Let me tell you something that I know happens right now. People that are poor get locked up and they have to sit in the county jail until they go to court because they can't bail out. People that are poor end up losing their jobs. Their children go into foster care, and so many other things that happen because they can't get out of jail, because bail starts at, I believe it's 50,000 in California.
The average, yeah.
50,000. So I don't know about you, but I don't have $5,000 that I want to give somebody. If I'm falsely accused, I'll sit in the county jail. So those are just the points that I would like to point out.
And you never get that money back, too. I mean, I'll just speak really, really briefly on it, and then I want to talk about Prop 17. But what I'll say is, I think people are getting too caught up in the nuances of Prop 25. Really what it does is eliminates an industry that has profited off poverty. That's what we're doing here. I mean, it is always easier to reform a system when you don't have the toxicity of bail or an industry or corporations flooding money into campaign contributions to legislators. Imagine how many reforms we could pass if the DA's Association wasn't a part of the picture. I think this is a conversation we're having. Is like, in a time where we're moving towards economic justice, this is economic justice. When you are not being criminalized because you're poor, that's economic justice. When the average Californian doesn't have $400 to pay for an emergency, but you're asking them to fork over $5,000 to bail out when they're falsely accused, which, by the way, they'll never get the money back, even if they're acquitted of the charges. That's economic justice. What we're doing is we are ridding a system that has for very, 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 a very long time historically had their tentacles implanted in the systemic racism that occurs. And in every, for one, like there's systemic racism in every part of the criminal justice system. Like, let's be frank, right? Like this is a systemic overhaul that eliminates a portion of that, but we're moving towards justice and equitable justice. Like that's what we're doing here. And the other thing to note is like, should this referendum fail, we are telling the legislative body that Californians in general think that we have gone too far with criminal justice reform. That's what the legislators are going to take it as. And by the way, if we ever want to get rid of cash money bail, if this referendum fails again, we have to run a ballot initiative. And, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but like these ballot initiatives are incredibly difficult. And I'm starting to learn that a lot of Californians don't think the same way that I do, or you do, Sam, or Saleem, and they don't have the same sense of redemption and forgiveness that we hold within ourselves. So I think, you know, that's the important piece. But I do want to move back to Prop 17, because I think, you know, which by the way, like our opponents are the same opponents on Prop 25, right? So it's
wow. Could you share with us? So, but first, I'm gonna come back to you in just a minute, Esteban. I want to kind of compare that real quick. But Saleem, how do you think? Like I talked about for a minute, voting in our communities, and how the vote on a local level impacts us directly as African Americans. And you know, you come from the same background I come from in Esteban. In LA specifically, how would you say that's going to impact? People just don't vote. How's that going to impact us?
Well, first and foremost, for hypothetically, another way, like you said, our county board of supervisors, they hold a lot of power in LA County. Sheriff Alex Villaraigosa, he's a very controversial figure, and hypothetically, the LA County Board of Supervisors and their constituents, the voters, can vote him out, you know, in a potential recall election. So the right to vote, it just has just so many implications. And even on a federal level, as Esteban touched on, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she just passed away, and now Donald Trump is trying to replace her with a conservative judge. And they definitely are not as progressive or open-minded, so to speak, I believe, you know, my opinion, as I'm a liberal at heart. And I would love to see that, you know, somebody with a liberal mindset to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So the president, he has the authority to nominate her successor. And basically, as voters, you know, just voting in presidential elections, you know, we will put in place the person who would have the capacity to replace the Supreme Court justice. So voting is very important. And for people of African American descent, you know, there was a time in America when African Americans were not allowed the right to vote. And, you know, people fought and died for the right for us to vote. And you raised a very great point, Sam, and also Esteban, but especially you, Sam. You know, if our right to vote didn't matter, why would people be going to such great lengths to this? You know, Donald Trump, he's trying to interfere with the postal system to basically obstruct mail-in ballots from being counted. So it goes very deep. And I would just implore people to vote and to vote for Prop 17. It's very important.
So as you said, Saleem, Sheriff Villanueva is a controversial figure. And when people think of, like, just in terms of voting, he's an elected official. He was voted into office. So when we take into consideration, how important is your vote? If you don't vote and you feel like the sheriff is not doing his job, or any other elected official, the way you change that systemically is to vote, get other people like-minded to vote, get behind a campaign and vote. Because if you take yourself out the game, you can't score any points, period. That's what it boils down to. So when we look at it on a local level, if we want different policing, different leadership in our policing or sheriff's department, our job is to go vote. And we have to be aware of the people that we're putting in the office. the same way a person who is a plain citizen that's not in elected office, if they do something wrong, they're held accountable. Our elected officials and those that are meant to represent us are also supposed to be held accountable because they represent us. I want to ask you, in terms of Esteban, in terms of Ruth Gator Ginsburg.
Well, can I add on to what you just said real quick?
Absolutely, go ahead, brother.
Because what I want to say too is, as formerly incarcerated individuals and as a movement, we don't really have a seat at the table or the political clout that, you know, probation does or the sheriffs do. And it's really because we haven't been able to garner our voting power, because oftentimes, like, we're marginalized and therefore we feel like our vote doesn't count. And therefore, and what happens is we become insignificant in Sacramento. And I think it's a tragedy. Like, if we were able to harness our voting power and our electoral power as a movement, then, you know, we would always have a seat at the table, and we would be just as powerful and just as influential as the lobbyists in Sacramento that fight us hard on every single reform that we try to push. Absolutely.
Saleem, let me ask you a question, and I know the feeling, but I want you to share. So November 3rd, people will be voting, or they'll be filling out ballots. How do you feel that you won't be able to fill out a ballot right now? Like, what does that make you feel like?
To be honest with you, Sam, and to our viewers, it hurts me. It brings tears to my eyes, because as you kind of made the analogy earlier, it's like, you know, I'm on the sidelines watching people play, and I can't get in the game, you know, and I know that my contributions would have an impact and an influence on the game. So it's heartbreaking to me to not be able to participate in our upcoming election on November the 3rd. You know, as a 43-year-old man, I understand, you know, how important my voice is, my right to vote is, and I wish that I could cast my ballot. You know, it's just a very hurtful feeling. I feel like I'm basically hamstrung. So that's how I feel. I'm just hurt.
Hey, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. And trust me, we're going to vote to make sure that you get that right back. But I want to also ask you, Esteban, you were in those shoes before. Like, what did it feel like to you when your sentence was completed and it's still like you still can't vote right now?
You know, I remember I saw my PO for the first time. I had two things on my list that I wanted to do: go eat steak and shrimp, and the other was to register to vote. And, you know, when I told him, he laughed about the steak and shrimp because it was like 8:30 in the morning. But when I told him about registering to vote, he looked at me very perplexed and was like, well, you can't vote. It's illegal. You're on parole. And I looked at him and was like, what do you mean I can't vote? Like, I'm contributing to society. Like, I'm not going back. Like, I'm not going to do anything that puts me back in those circumstances. Like, why can't I vote? Like, I completed I did my time. Like, you know, like, I had this naive, I guess, sense of what redemption looked like when you first come home. And when I found out that I was unable to vote, I felt very disconnected. I felt disconnected from society. I felt like, you know, I will be judged the rest of my life. Like, I felt like I would never be able to shake the shame that I carried.
Wow. And brother, I echo what both of you felt, because I remember when I came home when Obama was running for his second term. And I felt bad because I couldn't vote for, even though it was a second term, I couldn't vote for the first African-American president. And I remember watching my family and being excited for them, but also feeling like I just wasn't part of the process. Even though I owned a home, I paid taxes, I was going to work every day, I was not part of the process, and I had no voice. And I remember I told myself that as soon as I can, I'm gonna vote. And I voted every time I vote, I post it online too. I post on social media because I think it's something, and you touched on this earlier, Saleem. And we lost one of the greats, one of our icons from the civil rights this year in 2020, John Lewis, who marched to make sure that all of this voter suppression, that the civil rights voting bill of 1964-65 would be passed, and put their lives, not just him, but many others, put their lives on the line so that we'd be able to do this, be able to vote, have our voice heard. And so when I think of losing someone like him, it's our turn to pick up that mantle and continue to press forward and make sure that we live in a country where everybody's voice is heard. Literally how important that is, because there are so many things that need to change in this country, and we see them, but we need to make sure that we use our voice in order to make those changes. I want to jump back for a minute in terms of felony disenfranchisement. I'd like for both of you to talk about this on a larger context. So felony disenfranchisement, you gave us a number already, Esteban, of the number of Black and brown people that are coming out that can't vote. And then connect that with voter suppression and just share your thoughts, each of you, would you please?
Can you re-ask the end of the question? So connect voter suppression to what we have in California as disenfranchisement?
Felony disenfranchisement.
So felony disenfranchisement, again, was in the Constitution, California Constitution, when it was first written out. I'll say what we see in Florida is a prime example of just how we are continuously franchised or disenfranchised and marginalized. It's Saleem said it best. It's like, why do you think they're trying to continuously marginalize us and keep us away from voting? Like, there's a reason, right? Because I think together, unified, we're stronger. We're stronger than anything America has ever experienced. I can't stress enough how many people have died to restore voting rights to folks, and like this is it speaks to the significance of it. There's a women's movement that restore voting rights to women. It's like voting isn't a privilege; it's a right, and I think that's the important piece here, right? It's like people are viewing it as like, oh, we're furthering your punishment, we're taking away your right to vote, and then you can prove, if you prove a productive member of society, you'll get it back. The truth is, voting is a fundamental democratic right. It's not a privilege. And I think that's the important thing to note.
How do you think, Saleem, how do you think race intersects on this? Like literally in this day and age, how do you think race intersects on this? Because right now we're talking about racial justice, equality. Like even last night, like yesterday, day before yesterday, we heard about the ruling with Breonna Taylor. So one police was indicted for shooting the wrong way, but no one's indicted for killing our sister. That did nothing but be a good citizen. And so how do you think race intersects into people being able to vote right now today, Saleem?
Well, I was definitely, to touch on Breonna Taylor, it was a slap in the face, the charges that were handed down and the people who were not held accountable. But, I don't really want to go into that too much. But in terms of race and voter suppression, and felony disenfranchisement, well, I would say I don't have the statistical data, but I would just from the eyeball test per se, I would think that most people of color tend to vote Democratic, and states like Virginia, they actually restored the right to vote to people who are have completed their prison sentences. Florida, as Esteban stated, I just read that in the news, I think yesterday, and I thought it was very cool. I think it was in 2018, they restored the right to vote to people on parole and who had completed their sentences. But I just saw that, I guess their Supreme Court said that people have to pay their fines in order to take advantage of that right. And then Michael Bloomberg, I salute him. He, I guess, donate the money or corral the money, so to speak, to pay those fees to give people the right to vote. So I would say that, statistically, people of color tend to vote Democratic. And, sad to say, people of, the system, as Esteban stated, the phrase systemic racism, it is real. There is a reason that people of color are filling up our jail systems. So, basically, with that being said, and people of color tending to vote Democratic, there is a great effort underway to bar these people from voting, because they know that this will put people with conservative sentiments and values in office. And if you do hold conservative values, that's your right. But however, I think that there is a recognition that people who are in prison and who are getting out of prison would have a tendency to vote Democratic. And there's an effort underway to suppress that and prevent those votes from being cast in various elections on state level, local level, and a federal level.
So to add to that, Esteban touched on a little, when we look at felony disenfranchisement in a larger context, also adding voter suppression is a part of voter suppression, especially in Black communities. Going back to the points that I made earlier, immediately after the end of the Civil War, when Reconstruction started and African Americans were able to vote, many of them went into offices and were elected into office in places like Mississippi and Alabama, and then were literally, through terrorist actions from organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, were either physically assaulted, killed, lynched, and ran out of office after they had been lawfully voted into office. And then the voter suppression began. You had to be able to sign your name, or you had to be able to prove certain things, or you had to have an address, or you had to have an ID. Like today, you have to have, some states have tried to pass laws where you have to have an ID, or you have to have all of these different requirements that the average white American might not have to have, so to speak. And so that disenfranchisement, both the felony disenfranchisement, as you have a disproportionate number of Black and brown people that are arrested, jailed, and then released and not allowed to vote, and then you have voter suppression. So in one instance, when we look at felony disenfranchisement, you're taking an entire chunk of people and basically saying, we're taking your right from you to vote. You can't vote anymore because we say so. And then if we look at other countries like Norway, a person that's in custody in Norway can vote. It's their right. They continue to be able to vote even while they're in custody. And we consider ourselves to be the leader of the free world. And California is considered to be one of the most progressive states. And yet we lag behind other states in being able to give people who've completed their sentences the right to vote. I'll go a step further, although this is not on the ballot, I'll go a step further. People should never, ever lose their right to vote, period, whether they're in custody or not. That's just my personal opinion. That's my belief, and I stick with it. I'm going to move on to Tuesday. This past Tuesday was National Voter Registration Day. And so that was a day to encourage eligible voters to register and to vote. And so I think that's supposed to come up on screen, how people can actually register to vote right now today. So you can still register to vote. Tuesday was just a call to action, so to speak. ARC, in conjunction with the Lakers Youth Foundation, last weekend actually did a voter registration rally. So if you want to go online, look at our screen right now. You can literally go online right now today and register to vote. That's just the first step. If you're 18 years old, please register to vote. Literally go online. Here's the information. You go online, you click register to vote now. Once you click register to vote, the next step will come up. Simple questions as, are you a US citizen? If you click US citizen, then you'll click next. Like literally, we're walking you through the process of registering to vote. I am a US citizen, I'm 18 years of older. And then you fill out the information, Mr., Miss, Mrs., email address, telephone number, and all of the other information that's necessary for you to be able to register to vote. And then what'll happen is they'll send you an email that tells you that you're registered to vote. You're registered to vote, and from that point forward, you'll always be able to vote. Let me share something else with you about being registered to vote. So we're in the work of criminal justice reform. One of the things that happen in the criminal justice system is when a person is accused of a crime and they're arrested, they go or have the opportunity to go to a jury trial. Now, originally, up until about 2 years ago, if you had a felony on your record, you could not serve on a jury trial. Many people didn't realize this law just recently passed. And so you're not able to, you'd be judged by a jury of your peers. Now imagine this large chunk of your peers who have felony convictions on their record that can't be on a jury trial. And that would include all three of the gentlemen that currently are speaking to you. That law has been changed now, but we have to look into it another way or do some more research on this. What I've noticed when I first came home, every year for the first 5 years that I was home, I received a jury summons. and I had to fill out the form to say that I was convicted and I couldn't serve. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Esteban, we passed, I think it was SB 310, I think it was. To be
I
able
won't remember the number.
right. So,
but we can follow up with folks on it.
absolutely. So basically, the law was passed that said even if you have a criminal conviction on your record, you can still serve on a jury. And since that law has been passed, and I've continued to be a registered voter, guess what? They haven't called me for jury duty. So just so you know, that's another thing. Just registering to vote puts you in a jury pool. And if you think of it in the terms when we say that you'll have the opportunity to be judged by a jury of your peers. My peers look like me. My peers have grown up the way that I've grown up and live in the places that I live. That's a jury of my peers. And oftentimes, if we pay attention to criminal to trials, you don't see a jury of your peers. There are people that don't live in the same areas that you live in and don't go to the schools that you go to, don't live in the communities where you live. So we want to take that into consideration too. That's part of being registered as a registered voter. That's part of it. The other thing is once you register to vote, you can register and ask for mail-in ballots. So every time there's a voting, there's an election, you'll automatically receive a ballot. They'll check with you every year to make sure that your address hasn't changed, and they'll mail you a ballot, and you can fill your ballot out. You don't have to put a stamp on it or anything. You place it back in the mailbox, and it goes to the polls for your voice to be heard. Or you can go to the polls. You don't necessarily have to do an absentee ballot or a voter ballot if you don't want to. You can go to the polls and vote too. Saleem, I want to ask you, for you, two-part question, why is voting important to you? And what are some of the issues that you care most about in your community right now today?
Voting is important to me because, as Esteban stated, it's a fundamental constitutional right. And I agree with you that no matter what, I believe that the right to vote in America should never be taken away, whether somebody was convicted of a crime, or whatever the case may be. I believe that it's a fundamental right. It's not a privilege. And and I believe strongly in the right to vote, and I cannot wait. I'm chomping at the bit to become a registered voter and to participate in every election, because I understand how critical and important my right is to vote and how critical my ballot is. And also, I wanted to encourage people to go a step further as well, not just vote, but, we need people to run for office as well, whether it be, as you said, Stam, on the school board, city council, different environmental boards, whatever the case may be. So just the right to vote to me is just a very fundamental right, and it's very critical, very valuable tool to affect positive change in my community and in the world. Let me see. The second part, some issues that are important to me and my community is I would like to see various monies allocated to making sure that schools are properly funded. I would like to see that money is allocated for job training in various, in my community, that money is allocated, where it's most needed and not just squandered. Also, there's a person in the highest office in the land that I personally don't care too much for, but I don't want to kick the hornet's nest on that one. But I wish I had the ability to cast a vote, in that election, just to have my say on the man in office. So, those are some issues that are important to me. And also just environmental laws. I care deeply. I'm a diehard liberal, I'm a lefty, so to speak. And, I care about our environment, and the fact that there are different laws being passed that are deregulating, things like the Clean Streams Act, I would like to see the Clean Streams Act be restored, so just different environmental laws as well. But, and also it goes on and on. So that's all that I have.
Hey, thank you, Saleem. Esteban, and I'll answer this question too. When did you first vote, and what was the feeling like when you voted?
So I voted in the last election. I got my voting rights restored in 2018. I'll say it felt empowering. It felt liberating to have my ballot in my hand. But the most important feeling I had was this a feeling I've never felt before in my life, and it was really a sense of belonging. I felt like I finally belonged to something. I felt like I was a part of a community, a broader community, right? And I felt like my voice had to be heard. It had to be heard, and it was going to be heard. And I felt like I was actually contributing. Like that one ballot I did research on, and I felt like I was an informed voter, and me turning in was like this is me influencing our future, and I think that's really what it is. People with felonies, I'll speak for myself, I can't speak for everybody, but having come home and then being told you couldn't vote, you feel this sense of apathy, and you feel like there's this American dream that's sold to you, but you can't be a part of it. And I think for us to be compelled to vote, we have to feel like we're a part of that system. And when I first voted, I felt like I was finally a part of that system, but I also felt guilty that I got to experience this powerful, beautiful feeling, but that there were so many other people that I knew, mind you, like that were my friends that I was mentoring, that I was life coaching, but who couldn't vote and couldn't feel that. And it just, to me, felt like this is just such a grave injustice. Like how can we just take that away from somebody? I mean, this is about, Prop 17 really is about a holistic way of moving away from a system that further just ostracizes people into one that is embracing, into one that is like, you know what, we see you, welcome home.
Thank you for that, Esteban. So I was able to vote in 2016. I didn't win, as we can see. I took it personal that happened, what Saleem said, but I've been able to vote in other city elections and things of that nature, and it felt like I'm doing my piece, because at first it would be my family would get together and we'd all have our ballots out, and I would help in explaining what to vote for and why, and what my views were, and doing the research, but actually being able to do it yourself, to fill in the little dot, and then, because the first time I went to the polls, but the next time I just did it as a family with mail-in ballots. And it felt good to be able to have everybody's laptops up, and we're looking at, why are we voting for this judge, right? That's another thing. Our judges, there's so many judges that have to be elected, and they're all on the ballot. And then we have this wonderful invention called the computer, where we can read about what are their views and determine, are their views the same as my views? And is this a judge that I want to actually be sitting on the bench that would judge my community? So there's so many different aspects of voting that impact us directly.
Yeah, it's about representation. It's about feeling represented.
And so every person coming home should be able to vote. It's a right. It's a right that should never ever be taken away from any human being that lives in a democratic country. Our vote should be able to count. I'd like to give each one of you an opportunity for some closing thoughts. Saleem, you want to give us your closing thoughts to our viewers that are watching right now?
I just want to say that it's definitely an honor to be here, and ARC is such a blessing. And I would just, based on what you've heard today, it's obviously up to you to make the decision for yourself, but I would implore people to vote for Prop 17. It's definitely a step in the right direction. And it will definitely have a positive effect on our community and in the world.
Thank you so much, Saleem. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. Last thoughts, Esteban?
Yeah, I would say, Prop 17 is really in the hands of voters now, and it's really on every California voter to ensure that the 50,000 people who have completed their prison sentences, that are out working jobs, raising children, living in our communities, have actually a say-so in our communities. And that's really what this is about. We can't have an elected government that represents all of us if all of us are not able to participate in that process. So vote yes on Prop 17 and restore the rights to votes to the men and women that deserve it.
Thank you, Esteban. And I'd like to ask, this is my call to action for everyone that's viewing. If you're not a registered voter, please register to vote. Check with your family members and your friends. Literally today, if you're having conversations on the phone, there are elections coming up, and ask them, are you registered to vote? And then help them register to vote if they're not. Register to vote, and then vote yes on Proposition 17, and vote your conscience on all the other propositions that are on the ballot and the officials that will be elected that will be leading our communities and our country in the coming years. Please, I'm gonna ask you once again, please register to vote. Ask your friends and family, are they registered to vote, and ask them to register to vote. It's vitally important. I think this could quite possibly be one of the most important elections coming up in our history or in our age right now, if we think about all the things that are happening in our communities and across this nation. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, vote yes on Prop 17. Next week, we will be talking about Proposition 20. Next week, please join us. Same bat time, same bat place. Thank you, everybody. Take care. God bless and stay safe.